My name is Angela Sutton, I'm 27. And I never thought the people sitting at my own family's dinner table would treat me worse than a stranger. The night began with the sound of forks clinking against china, the low hum of polite conversation, and the heavy smell of roasted chicken filling Melissa's dining room. My sister's house always looked like something from a glossy magazine. Glimmering marble counters, perfectly arranged flowers, wine glasses set at each place like trophies. But sitting there, in a chair that suddenly felt too small, I felt like an intruder instead of family. Melissa sat across from me, her red lipstick shining like a warning light. She leaned back in her chair, swirling wine, her smirk cutting sharper than the knife beside her plate. "So," she said lightly, but her eyes never left mine. "Still working that little admin job?" The way she dragged out the word little made my chest tighten. I forced a smile, though my palms pressed against my thighs to stop the shaking. "It pays the bills," I replied softly. She laughed, tilting her head, barely. The table chuckled with her, though no one dared meet my eyes. My mother shifted uncomfortably, staring at her plate. My father coughed into his napkin. Their silence was louder than Melissa's mocking voice. I wanted to disappear, but instead I sat there, my skin burning under her gaze. The air felt thick, like every breath had to push through cement. Then, without warning, I heard the scrape of her chair. Melissa stood, lifting her glass of water. For a heartbeat, I thought she was going to make a toast. Instead, she tipped the glass forward. Cold water cascaded down my hair, soaking my blouse, dripping into my lap. I gasped, the chill biting into my skin. The clatter of cutlery stopped. Melissa's voice cut through the silence. "You've got 5 minutes to leave my house." Her words echoed, sharp as a slap. My fork slipped from my fingers and clinked against the plate. The room felt frozen. No one moved. No one spoke. I looked at my parents, searching for something: shock, outrage, even mild disapproval. My mother lowered her eyes. My father shifted in his seat. Not one word came. The humiliation spread through me faster than the water. My face burned, though my body shook with cold. Every eye at the table pierced me, not with pity, but with judgment. I forced my chair back. The legs screeched against the tile, a sound that seemed to slice the silence apart. My hands trembled as I grabbed my purse, water still dripping from my sleeves onto the polished floor. Melissa smirked, folding her arms. "Tick-tock, Angela." Her voice was calm, almost amused, as though this were nothing but a game. I wanted to scream, to demand why, to shatter the perfect picture of her spotless life. But the words stuck in my throat, strangled by pride and pain. Instead, I whispered, "Okay." It wasn't strength, and it wasn't surrender. It was survival. Each step toward the door felt heavier than the last, my wet clothes clinging to me, the cold soaking into my skin. Behind me, the dinner table slowly filled again with muted conversation, forks scraping against plates as though nothing had happened. Halfway to the door, I froze. A memory slammed into me. I was 12 again, standing in our childhood kitchen. Melissa had grabbed my drawing, the one I'd worked on for hours, and dunked it into the sink, laughing as the colors bled into nothing. I had cried, but Mom only told me, "Don't overreact. It's just paper." Now, years later, it wasn't paper she destroyed. It was me. The sound of laughter behind me snapped me back. I reached the door, fingers fumbling on the handle. My heart hammered so loud it drowned out everything else. I opened it and stepped into the cool night air. The sky stretched above me, black and endless, the stars blurred by tears I refused to let fall. The chill wind hit my wet clothes, and I shivered. Inside, I could still hear the muffled clinks of glasses, Melissa's voice rising above the rest in cheerful conversation as if pouring water on me was nothing more than a minor inconvenience, already forgotten. But I would not forget. Not tonight, not ever. As the cold water dripped into my eyes, I realized this wasn't just dinner, it was war. I walked out of Melissa's house with water still dripping from my hair, the night air biting against my soaked clothes. Each step down her front porch echoed like a gavel, final and cold. The street was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic, but inside my head, everything was loud. Her words, 5 minutes to leave my house, kept replaying like a cruel chant. I gripped the strap of my purse so tightly my knuckles ached. My shoes squished with every step, damp leather pressing against my skin. The humiliation clung to me heavier than the water. But as I walked, another sound rose beneath the humiliation: memory. Melissa's voice wasn't just tonight's voice, it was every voice from childhood. Every sneer, every command, every time she had to be in control. I was 7. standing in our backyard with a jump rope in my hands. Melissa, a year older but always louder, yanked it from me. I'm first. You can wait. I protested. But she laughed and called me a crybaby. Mom's voice floated from the kitchen window. Angela, let your sister go first. Don't make a fuss. Even then, my turn never came. The memory shifted. I was 16. Dad had just told us about Grandma's will, the little vacation cabin in Oklahoma. The one where I spent summers fishing and sketching by the lake, would go to Melissa someday. No discussion, no question. She's the responsible one, Dad had said, without even glancing at me. Responsible. That was their word for her confidence, her sharp tongue, her ability to push herself into every decision. For me, they had another word, quiet. The favoritism was never shouted, but it was painted in small strokes across every year of my life. Back in the present, my wet clothes clung to me, pulling me down like lead weights. I walked faster, almost running, as if I could escape the past along with the night, but the past was stitched into me. I remembered school. The times teachers praised Melissa for her bold answers while I shrank into silence. I remembered family dinners where she dominated every story, while my attempts at sharing were brushed aside with, "That's nice, Angela." And yet, I had moments, little victories. I remembered the day I beat Melissa at Monopoly. She flipped the board over, money scattering across the floor like confetti. "It's just a stupid game," she'd snapped. But the rage in her eyes told me it wasn't about the game, it was about losing control. Even for a second. Tonight was no different. She hadn't just poured water over me, she had poured power, making sure I drowned under it while everyone watched. Still, as I reached my car and leaned against the cool metal, catching my breath, a flicker of something else sparked inside me. Not just anger, not just shame, something sharper. Because here's the thing, Melissa always had to win, always. But what she didn't see, what she had never seen, was that losing has its own power. Every loss had been shaping me, teaching me to endure, to bide my time. I looked back at the house. Through the glowing windows, I saw silhouettes moving around the dinner table. Forks clinking again, life resuming without me. Melissa's laughter rang faintly through the glass, high and victorious. She thought she'd finished me. She thought tonight was the end. But standing there in the shadows, dripping and humiliated, I felt a whisper stir inside me. It wasn't loud, not yet, but it was there. She had won the battle at dinner. But something inside me whispered, the war wasn't over. When I finally made it back to my apartment that night, the silence was so thick it pressed against me. My tiny one-bedroom in Dallas didn't look like much peeling paint on the windowsill, the faint rattle of the old air conditioner, and bills stacked neatly on the counter like silent enemies waiting to be paid. This was my life, a modest admin job that barely covered rent, groceries, and bus fare. The paycheck came on Fridays, but by Monday most of it was already gone. I lived paycheck to paycheck, balancing my budget like a tightrope walker above a canyon. I sat on my worn couch, pulling off my damp shoes. The cushions sagged beneath me, their fabric fraying at the edges. It wasn't luxury, but it was mine. Still, Melissa's voice rang in my head. That little admin job. The way she said it like I was barely more than a child playing pretend dug into me deeper than the cold water she poured over my head. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, and memories flooded in. College, I was 19. And I had just gotten the acceptance letter from UT Austin, not just acceptance, full scholarship. My chest swelled with pride as I waved the paper in front of Mom. But that same week, Dad lost his job. Bills piled up. Melissa shook her head and said, "Someone's gotta be practical here." Mom sat me down at the kitchen table. "Angela, you'll have other chances. Right now the family needs you. If you work, we can all survive this." I swallowed the dream. I took a job at a local office, answering phones, typing reports, promising myself it was just temporary. Melissa, meanwhile, went off to college without looking back. She never missed a semester, never worried about tuition. Our parents scraped and saved for her. The irony hit me years later. I had sacrificed my future for family, and in return, Melissa got everything I gave up. I blinked back to the present. The apartment smelled faintly of reheated noodles from dinner the night before. I stared at the bills again, my name printed in bold black ink. Overdue notice. Payment required. I whispered to myself, failure, that's what she sees. The word stung because sometimes I believed it. I thought about the corporate towers downtown, the shiny glass offices I passed every morning on my bus ride. Somewhere inside, Melissa worked her glamorous job, heels clicking against marble floors while I sat at a gray cubicle, my headset digging into my ear, my fingers aching from typing. The imbalance was always there. She reached higher. I held the ground beneath her feet. I reached for my phone, scrolling through old photos. Melissa in her graduation gown, Melissa at her job promotion party, Melissa standing in front of her brand new SUV, and me, always in the background, smiling small, like a supporting character in her movie. I set the phone down, my chest heavy. And yet, deep inside, I knew the truth. I wasn't disposable. I had been used. I gave up my future for this family. And now they laughed as if I was disposable. The next morning, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. My eyes were still swollen from lack of sleep, the faint taste of bitterness on my tongue. When I saw the caller, I hesitated. For a fleeting second, I hoped she was calling to comfort me, to say what Melissa did was wrong. I answered softly. "Hi, Mom." Her voice was sharp, not warm. "Angela, what happened last night?" I sat up, the sheets twisting around my legs. "You were there, you saw it." She sighed heavily, the kind of sigh that carried judgment. "Melissa told me you provoked her, that you embarrassed her in front of everyone." My chest tightened. "Provoked her?" She dumped water on my head. There was silence, then Dad's voice in the background. Low and gruff. "Angela, you could have handled it better." The words stabbed harder than Melissa's water ever could. My own parents choosing her. Again. "Do you even hear yourselves?" My voice cracked. I was humiliated. "And you're blaming me?" Mom's tone hardened. "You've always been sensitive. We don't want more drama in the family." I pressed my forehead into my palm, my hair falling forward. Sensitive. The word that had been my cage since childhood. Whenever Melissa struck, I was sensitive. Whenever I tried to defend myself, I was overreacting. I whispered, "Why do you always take her side?" The silence on the line told me everything. They didn't even deny it. Another memory stabbed in. Flashback. I was 15, accused of breaking Melissa's vase. She stood there, fake tears in her eyes, swearing I did it. I hadn't, but Dad grounded me for 2 weeks anyway. Later, Melissa smirked as I cleaned her room. Punishment doubled. Back then, I told myself they just didn't know the truth. Now I realized they never cared to know. I took a shaky breath. "She humiliated me, Mom. In front of everyone. And you say nothing." Her reply came cold and steady. "Angela, families stick together. Don't make things harder than they already are. Families stick together." Except when it came to me. I pulled the phone away, staring at the screen as though I could see her face. My chest felt hollow. I whispered into the silence. "Maybe I was never really part of this family." Dad muttered something in the background. But I ended the call before I could hear it. My hand trembled as I set the phone down on the nightstand. The apartment was quiet again. The only sound the low buzz of the fridge. But the quiet didn't comfort me this time, it pressed in, suffocating. In that moment, I wasn't just sisterless, I was parentless too. The mornings in my small Dallas apartment had started to feel heavier than the nights. The quiet hum of the air conditioner and the faint smell of reheated coffee reminded me that I was alone in ways that hurt. Loneliness was no longer just an emotion, it was a presence, a weight pressing against my chest. Work became my refuge. The fluorescent lights of the office, the rhythmic clatter of keyboards, the low murmur of phone calls, they became familiar, grounding sounds. I started arriving early, leaving late, burying myself in spreadsheets and schedules. Every completed task was a small victory, a tiny flame of control in a life that had so often felt dictated by others. One Tuesday afternoon, as I was filing reports, Mr. Henderson, my boss, paused by my desk. His polished shoes clicked against the tile floor, a sound that always seemed to announce authority. He leaned over, his expression unreadable. "You're thorough," he said, tapping the top of a report. "I've noticed. How'd you like some extra hours this week? We've got a big project and I could use someone I trust." I blinked, unsure whether to hope or fear. Hope that maybe someone recognized my efforts, feared that it was temporary, that any recognition could be snatched away like a dream in my past. "Sure," I said, voice tight with disbelief. "Good." He nodded. "I knew you'd step up." It was such a small exchange, yet it echoed in me. For once, someone valued my work, my diligence, without needing a dramatic display or a competition. Later, during lunch, David, a coworker who always had an encouraging word, joined me. He was the kind of person who noticed when others were struggling without asking for attention. "Hey," he said, sliding the container of soup across the table, toward me. "You've been killing it lately. Just keep at it. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." His voice had a quiet strength. I looked at him and felt a flicker of warmth. For the first time in a long time, someone was in my corner. Not because I'd earned their attention with drama or humiliation, but simply because I deserved it. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the hum of the office, the occasional ringing phone, the whisper of papers being shuffled. Somewhere in the rhythmic normalcy, a seed of hope took root. I realized that family or the support I had been craving might not be the ones I was born into. Maybe it had nothing to do with blood. I remembered nights of humiliation. Dinners where Melissa's laughter had drowned out my voice, the sting of cold water on my skin. And yet, here I was being noticed, appreciated, even quietly celebrated. For the first time, I felt the stirrings of strength that didn't rely on revenge or confrontation. It was the kind of strength that grew quietly, under the radar, and built a foundation no one could touch. I finished my soup slowly, savoring the warmth, the fluorescent lights reflected in the tabletop, and I caught my own gaze in the polished surfacer girl, learning to stand on her own. Maybe the family I was searching for wasn't the one I was born into. The next family gathering arrived like a storm I hadn't prepared for. My aunt's birthday, a modest party in her Dallas home, should have been a neutral ground. Instead, Melissa made it a stage. She stood at the center of the room, a glass in her hand, ready to deliver her speech. I felt the tension coil in my stomach, tightening with each word she uttered. "And let's not forget Angela," she began, her voice bright with mock cheer. "Always trying, always failing, still jobless, still worthless, but she makes a great guest." A ripple of laughter spread across the room. My jaw tightened. My fingers curled around my napkin until the edges dug into my palms. The smell of cake frosting mixed with the faint tank of punch in the air. But I hardly noticed. I could feel every eye on me, 1,000 silent judgments, as if I were a spectacle rather than a sister. But something inside me shifted. Instead of retreating, my pulse steadied. I stayed silent. Silence became armor, while she relished in the performance of humiliation. I felt my anger crystallizing into something sharper, something strategic. Every smirk, every laugh, every judgmental glance she threw my way was noted, catalogued. I wouldn't retaliate in the moment, but I would remember. I was 10, playing a board game with Melissa. She cheated, of course, flipping the board over when I had almost won. I had learned even then that her victories were never fair. Her power came from intimidation, manipulation. Now years later, she had grown bolder. The audience of relatives laughed at my expense, plates clinking, glasses raising to her triumph. But my mind was calculating. My lips were pressed into a firm line, my chest rising and falling. Steady and calm. David had taught me something small but important. Sometimes, silence carries more weight than words. Let the other person think they have one. Let them overextend. Wait for the cracks to show. Melissa believed she had me. She believed my quietness was submission. But she didn't see that beneath the surface, a storm was forming. I catalogued her tactics, her smirks, her preferred targets. I memorized the angles, the timing, the weaknesses. By the time the party wound down, she was still basking in attention, smiling as though she had conquered me. But I felt a strange calm, almost exhilaration, knowing that the quietest person in the room was planning her own rise. She thought my silence meant weakness, but silence can also be the start of strategy. The apartment was quiet, but this time, it felt different. Instead of heavy, suffocating loneliness, there was a hum of purpose. My laptop glowed in the dim light, casting pale reflections on the coffee-stained table. The hum of the old coffee machine punctuated the silence, a steady rhythm as I jotted down numbers, receipts, and budgets. I was studying bookkeeping at night. At first, it was just a distraction, an attempt to prove to myself I could focus on something meaningful. But soon, it became a lifeline. Every formula I memorized, every balance sheet I understood, built a small sense of control I hadn't felt in years. David dropped by one evening, his voice cutting through the quiet. "Burning the midnight oil again." I smiled, brushing damp strands of hair from my face, trying to make sense of numbers and my life. He laughed softly, the kind of sound that felt like sunlight slipping through blinds. "You're good at this? You've got a knack." I looked back at the spreadsheet, then at him. "Thanks. I think I'm finally doing something for me, not for them." He nodded, leaning against the counter, arms crossed. His presence wasn't overwhelming, it was grounding. I realized that support didn't have to be loud or dramatic. Sometimes, it was steady, quiet, and reassuring. Night after night, I worked. The soft glow of my laptop illuminated the lines on my face, the fatigue under my eyes, but also the determination etched into my posture. Coffee cups piled up beside me, each one a testament to long hours, small sacrifices, and little victories. I counted every dollar I could save, 10 here, 20 there. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I felt the weight of my independence slowly building, a fortress no one could pour water on or mock at a dinner table. One night in college, I had stayed awake late, balancing my first personal budget. Melissa had teased me over the phone. "You're counting pennies again." Pathetic. At the time, her words had stung, a reminder that my sacrifices were invisible. But tonight, her judgment didn't matter. The apartment smelled faintly of instant coffee and pencil shavings from my notes. I ran my fingers along the smooth surface of my desk, feeling the grooves worn into the wood over years of work. Each tiny detail grounded me, made me feel real, capable, and present. David brought in more than companionship, he brought perspective. While I obsessed over mistakes or tiny setbacks, he reminded me to see progress. "It's all building up, Angela. You're laying the foundation now." Foundation. That word lingered. I realized that for years, I had built nothing for myself. Now, I was constructing something solid, tangible, and resilient. It didn't matter that Melissa had her triumphs, that my parents dismissed me. What mattered was that I was investing in myself, quietly, deliberately. I leaned back, stretching my stiff shoulders. Outside, the city hummed with life, distant traffic, and the occasional siren. Inside, I had my own rhythm calculations. Notes, coffee, steam curling in the air, David's steady presence nearby. For the first time in years, I was investing in myself, not in their approval. The past came rushing back, unbidden. As I stared at a blank canvas on my kitchen counter, an old notebook I used for sketches. Childhood memories are never quiet. They echo like footsteps in an empty hall. I was 8, standing in the art room at school. I had painted a sunrise, bright oranges and pinks spilling across the page. A little masterpiece I was proud of. I held it up with trembling hands, beaming. Melissa was there, leaning over my shoulder. "Cute," she said softly, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. Before I could react, she grabbed the paper and tore it in half, the fibers rasping under her grip. I gasped. My hands went to my mouth. The teacher intervened. But Melissa shrugged, her grin smug and victorious. "Mom said, don't overreact. Angela, she's just jealous." I had forgotten some of the details, the way the sunlight hit the torn edges, the scent of wet paint still lingering, but the feeling stayed. Humiliation disguised as a lesson. A warning that her dominance had always been expected. It wasn't random. It was a pattern. Flash forward to tonight. The dinner table. The cold water. The laughter. Melissa's cruelty wasn't a sudden eruption. It was a continuation of a lifelong script. From childhood games to scholarships, family favors to birthday parties. She had always needed to assert control, to keep me small while she thrived. I remembered the subtle jabs over every holiday, every family achievement, the comparisons that made me feel invisible. And suddenly, everything clicked. The dinner, the snide remarks, the laughter. It wasn't just about that night. It was never just about that night. Even as I replayed her words, her smirk, the way the room fell silent while I gathered myself, I felt a strange clarity. I wasn't imagining things. Melissa wasn't just my sister. She was my rival from birth. The smell of paint lingered faintly in my kitchen as I set my notebook down. I touched the edges of the torn pages from my childhood, tracing the fibers. Every memory, every humiliation, every forced sacrifice. They were pieces of a story I was now seeing in full. It was painful, yes, but it was also empowering. Recognition brought clarity. If this had been her strategy all along, I could finally anticipate it, see it coming, and decide how I would respond, not blindly, not defenseless. Even as I sipped my lukewarm tea, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator, I felt the subtle shift. No longer merely a victim in someone else's play. I was learning the rules, and soon, I would be ready to write my own moves. She wasn't just my sister. She was my rival from birth. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, just as I was balancing my savings ledger. The hum of the office printer and the faint click of keyboards filled the background, grounding me. "Angela." Melissa's voice trembled on the line, uncharacteristically soft. I need your help." Financially, I froze, staring at my calculator. Her words echoed like a distant alarm. Melissa, the one who had poured water over my head, who had laughed at my apartment, the one who had made a spectacle of me time and time again, was asking me for money. "Are you serious?" I asked slowly, my voice measured. The office smelled faintly of brewed coffee and old paper. a sharp contrast to the tension in the conversation. Yes, she admitted, I lost my job, and I don't know how I'll pay my rent. I could almost hear her trembling over the phone. For years, she had been untouchable, untamed, untouchably confident. Now, in the quiet desperation of her call, she sounded human. I was 7, Melissa, insisting I let her go first on the swing. You can wait, she had said, smirking. I had always waited, small and obedient. Tonight, decades later, the tables had flipped. I could feel the old rush of triumph pressing against me, the intoxicating sense of irony. But I didn't want to humiliate her. I didn't want to be cruel. Instead, I breathed, listening to her uneven breaths. I'm sorry, Melissa, I said, keeping my voice calm, steady. I can't help you. What? She snapped, a hint of panic creeping in. Angela, I didn't think you'd. I interrupted, soft but firm. I know. You didn't expect it, but you need to handle this yourself. I've spent years being underestimated. I'm not repeating the cycle for you. Her silence was loud. She stammered, trying to find a retort, but nothing came. I could hear the click of her coffee mug against the kitchen counter, the faint hum of her apartment. For once, she had no power, no audience, no laughter to hide behind. I hung up gently, closing the folder on my desk. The weight of decades of humiliation lifted slightly, replaced with something far more satisfying than revenge. Authority. I realized I didn't need to lecture her or pour back pain. My refusal, delivered with quiet confidence, carried more force than any public display could. For once, she was the one left speechless at the table. I leaned back in my chair, the soft hum of the office settling around me, the smell of paper and coffee grounding my victory. I wasn't boasting. I wasn't savoring humiliation. I was claiming my dignity, my hard-earned empowerment, and in that moment, I understood something fundamental. Power doesn't come from loud gestures, it comes from standing firm, from knowing your worth, from refusing to participate in the cycles that kept you small. The next day, I walked into the house that had once felt like a battlefield. My parents were waiting, faces tense, eyes pleading. Angela, Mom began, her voice tight. We need to talk. About Melissa. I could feel the old pull of guilt tugging at me, the reflexive desire to apologize, to make peace. But the memory of that dinner, the cold water, the laughter, hit me like a flash of ice. You have to help her, Dad added, desperation undercutting his usual calm. She's in trouble, and she doesn't know what to do. I stared at them, the smell of cinnamon rolls from the counter mixing with the stale tension in the air. For years, they had overlooked my pain, sided with Melissa at every humiliation, and now they were framing me as the problem. I can't, I said firmly, the words cutting through the room like a blade. I've helped myself. I can't keep bailing her out when she never cared about me. Mom's face fell. Angela, don't be selfish. She's your sister. I remembered the cold water, the snide laughter, the silence from them while Melissa humiliated me at dinner. I felt the familiar tightness in my chest, but this time, it didn't paralyze me, it strengthened me. Selfish, I echoed, voice steady. Do you know what selfish is? Selfish is pretending my pain doesn't exist so she can continue stepping over me. Selfish is ignoring my dignity to save her pride. I've spent years being considerate. I'm finally learning the difference. Dad opened his mouth. Mom's hands twisted in front of her, but I didn't waver. I could see the surprise flicker in their eyes, the unease as my calm certainty filled the room. That night at Melissa's dinner, the humiliation, their silence. I had been small, voiceless, powerless. Tonight, I was neither. I took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the sun through the kitchen window, the faint scent of sugar in the air, the small noises of the house, the hum of the fridge, the soft creak of the floorboards were my rhythm now, not theirs. I will not be manipulated into fixing what I didn't break, I said finally, my voice low but unwavering. I won't let past patterns dictate my choices. I am not responsible for her failures. They shifted uncomfortably, realizing my refusal wasn't just defiance, it was a boundary, a lesson finally learned. In that moment, I understood fully. My parents' definition of selfishness had always been skewed, meant to keep me small, but I had grown, and the rules no longer applied to me. They called me selfish, but I was finally learning the difference between selfishness and self-respect. The dining room smelled of roasted chicken and polished wood familiar, but tonight it felt charged, like the air before a storm. Melissa was already seated at the head of the table, smirking, her eyes flicking toward me as I stepped in. Angela, she said, voice dripping with faux sweetness. Hope you're ready. Don't want any surprises tonight. Do we? I felt the old heat rising in my chest, the reflexive anxiety that had haunted me since childhood, but I pushed it down. Tonight, I wasn't a victim. I was calm, measured, prepared. The water, the dinner table, the laughter. I remembered the cold shock, the humiliation, the stifled tears, and I realized something essential. None of that defined me anymore. Melissa began her speech, subtly mocking me to our relatives. "We're all doing well," she said, lips curling. "And Angela, well, she's still figuring things out. Isn't that right?" Laughter followed, soft but pointed. The smell of gravy and roasted carrots seemed almost oppressive, the silverware clinking like tiny alarms. I took a deep breath, letting the room's rhythm settle around me, the scrape of chairs, the low murmur of conversation, the occasional hum of the ceiling fan. And then I spoke, calm, firm, every word measured. "I am figuring things out," I said, letting my gaze meet hers. "And I've done it without belittling anyone. In fact, I've earned a promotion, secured my finances, and started building a life I can be proud of." A few heads turned, surprise flickering across faces. Melissa's smirk faltered, a brief flash of confusion and shock. You mean," she stammered, but I didn't pause. "Yes," I said, cutting through the tension like sunlight through blinds. "I'm independent, stable, and I don't need anyone's approval, least of all yours." I could see it in her eyes, the calculation, the disbelief, the sudden awareness that her usual tactics wouldn't work. Her voice, usually so sharp, faltered. I was just trying to humiliate me," I asked gently, almost rhetorically. "That used to work, but not anymore." The room was silent except for the faint scrape of a chair and the hum of the chandelier lights. For once, she had no audience to shield her, no laughter to hide behind. I felt a strange satisfaction. Not cruel or vengeful, just the quiet strength of standing tall. The air seemed to shift, charged with clarity. The faint scent of rosemary from the tablecloth somehow comforting. Her cheeks flushed, her hands tightening around the fork. I didn't gloat, I didn't mock. I simply smiled, calm and unwavering. This time, I didn't walk out wet and humiliated. Melissa did. The days after that dinner were quieter, in a way that felt like relief settling over a stormy sea. The tension that had followed me for decades began to loosen. The air in my apartment smelled of coffee and warm sunlight filtering through the blinds. I reflected on boundaries. I had finally drawn on the long road from being the overlooked, ridiculed sister to someone who understood her own worth. I realized family wasn't about blood or tradition, it was about respect, support, and trust. David stopped by that evening, leaning casually against my doorframe. "How's the empire building going?" he teased, smiling. I laughed softly, the sound lighter than it had been in years. "Slowly, but steadily," I said, the glow of my laptop illuminating my face. "And you know, the real victory isn't the numbers, it's feeling like I belong to myself first." The water, the laughter, the dinners once sharp daggers in my memory now served as markers of growth. Each humiliation had taught me something essential about resilience, patience, and timing. I poured myself a cup of tea, savoring the warmth as I looked out at the city lights. The distant hum of traffic and occasional siren reminded me the world was still moving. Alive, indifferent, but that didn't scare me. I had found my own rhythm. Boundaries weren't just words. They were the silent fences I built around myself. I didn't need to prove myself to anyone who had spent years undermining me. My work, my finances, my quiet victories, they were evidence of my new life. David moved closer, setting down a small stack of notebooks I had lent him. "You've changed," he said softly, "but in a good way." I nodded, feeling a warmth that wasn't dependent on family or validation. My independence, my choices, my voice, they were mine, and I cherished them. Later, I glanced at my phone. A message from Melissa flickered on the screen. "You win. Maybe we need to talk." I didn't rush to reply. Some lessons take time, and some bridges rebuild slowly, if at all. I leaned back, tracing the rim of my coffee cup, the soft clink against the saucer, the smell of roasted beans, the faint hum of the city. It all reminded me that life moves forward, and I was moving with it, not in reaction to others. Family had always been defined for me by blood, obligation, and hierarchy. Now, I defined it by respect, support, and love that I could rely on. That meant sometimes creating distance, sometimes embracing new allies, sometimes learning that home could be a person or a place that chose you back. David's laughter floated across the room as he shared a story from work. I smiled, the sound blending with the quiet city hum. Independence wasn't lonely, it was liberating. She told me I had 5 minutes to leave, but I realized I was never the one who had to go.